Montana Territory, August 1879. The wind rolled down from the Bitterroot Mountains like a breath from heaven. But it carried no comfort for the woman swaying in the saddle, her hands barely holding the reins. Joanna Jensen's face was pale beneath the dust. Her lips cracked from days without proper rest. She kept her eyes fixed ahead, on the long rise that curved up toward the ridge. 100 more yards, maybe 2. But her body was done. She did not see the cowboy until his horse stepped out of the trees. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and steady. "You are about to fall off that horse." Joanna blinked hard, trying to focus. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with a rifle slung across his back and a weather-worn hat pulled low against the sun. His eyes were sharp but kind, the color of burnt amber. I just need to make it over the hill," she whispered. He dismounted in one smooth motion. "You are not going to make it anywhere like this." "I have to," she rasped. "My daughter is waiting. I left her with a family near Corvallis. I promised I'd come back." He stepped closer, hands raised like he was approaching a wild horse. "Let me help you down." She did not argue. Her knees buckled the moment her boots touched the ground. He caught her before she hit the dirt. "I'm Ryder McAllister," he said, lifting her easily into his arms. "You are not walking anywhere." She tried to protest, but the warmth of his chest and the strength in his arms made her eyes drift shut. Joanna Jensen." "All right, Joanna Jensen," Ryder said, shifting her weight. "Let's get you up that hill." He carried her up the slope with careful steps, her cheek resting against his shoulder. She did not weigh much. He had carried saddlebags heavier, but something about her made each step feel like more than just a climb. She was trembling, but not from fear. She had been pushing herself past her limits, and he could feel it in her shallow breath. Near the top, she opened her eyes and looked straight into his. "You do not have to do this," she said. "I know," he said, "but I want to." They crested the ridge just as the sun dipped behind the mountains, painting the sky in gold and fire. Joanna leaned her head back, taking it in like it was the first time she had seen the sky in days. "You carried me," she said softly, her voice full of something he could not name yet. "Why?" Ryder looked down at her. "Because I saw something in your eyes. Something strong." She gave a tired smile and closed her eyes again. He set up camp just below the ridge, where a grove of pine trees offered shelter. She slept while he boiled water and cleaned her scraped palms. When she stirred, he knelt beside her and held out a tin cup. "Drink." She took a few slow sips, her hand shaking. "Thank you." "You should not be out here alone," he said. "My husband died 2 winters ago," she said. "I had to find work, and I did, sewing for a mining camp, but they stopped paying. I walked away with what I could carry." "And your daughter?" "Ada. She is 6. She is safe." Ryder stared into the fire. "You walked from the mountains alone?" "I had no other choice." "You do now," he said. She looked at him, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled between them, and the night deepened. The next morning, she tried to stand. Her legs gave out again. "You are not walking today," Ryder said, already packing the camp. "We will ride." He helped her up behind him on the saddle. Her arms circled his waist hesitantly at first, then more firmly as the horse started moving. He felt the way she leaned into him not just for balance, but for something steadier. By late afternoon, they reached the valley road. A supply wagon passed, and he flagged it down. "Corvallis is another 2 days' ride," Ryder told her after speaking with the driver. "We will not make it by nightfall." "I trust you," Joanna said. He turned in the saddle to look at her. "You do. I do not say things I do not mean." He nodded slowly. "Good, because I am not just taking you there. I am making sure you both get home." They camped again that night in a meadow by a stream. Joanna washed her face in the cold water, and when she turned to him, her cheeks were pink from the chill, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked more alive than she had the day before. "You keep surprising me," she said. "How is that?" "You look like a man who has seen too much," she said. "But you talk like someone who has not given up yet." "I have not," she smiled. "Neither have I." He cooked beans over the fire, slicing hardtack with his knife. She sat beside him, too quiet for a long while. "I thought I would die on that hill," she said finally. "I could not feel my legs. But then you came. And you looked at me like you were not afraid," Ryder said. She turned her face toward him. "I was not." He reached for her hand. She did not pull away. By the time they reached Corvallis, Joanna's strength had returned. She rode behind him, arms around his waist, head resting against his back. When they reached the farmhouse where her daughter waited, the little girl came running across the yard. "Ada!" Joanna cried, sliding down from the horse. The child flung herself into her mother's arms. Joanna held her close, crying against her hair. Ryder stepped back, giving them space, but when Joanna looked up, her eyes went straight to him. "This is the man who brought me home," she told her daughter. "His name is Ryder." Ada tilted her head. "Are you going to stay?" Ryder cleared his throat. "That depends." Joanna rose, still holding Ada's hand. "On what?" "On whether you want me to." She smiled, the kind of smile that wrapped around the ache inside him and pulled it clean. "I do," she said, and just like that, Ryder knew he was not going anywhere. The next morning, Ryder rose before the light reached the edge of the fields. The house behind him was quiet, its windows still dark. He stood by the corral, hands resting on the top rail, watching two bay geldings nose at the grass. Mist hung low along the fence line, curling around his boots like ghost smoke. He heard the soft tread of footsteps before she spoke. "You always up this early?" Joanna stood with her arms folded against the morning chill, her sleeves rolled up, hair pinned with care. She looked steadier than she had on the trail, but her eyes still held that same quiet weight, like she was always measuring how much more she could carry. "Comes with too many miles spent under the sky," Ryder said. "Hard to sleep in past dawn once you've done it enough." She stepped beside him without a word, leaning on the fence as if she had always belonged there. Her gaze followed the horses, but her thoughts were somewhere else. "You don't have to stay," she said after a stretch of silence. "Most men would have left once they'd done their part. I've never been most men." She glanced sideways at him, lips pressing together, not in disapproval but in thought. "I don't know what to make of you," she said. "You don't ask for anything, but you don't walk away either." Ryder shrugged, watching the horses. "Maybe I've done enough walking." Joanna looked back toward the house. "The couple caring for Ada, their kin, but they've got 5 mouths of their own. I was supposed to take her once I'd saved enough. I haven't yet." "You will." She tilted her head. "How do you know?" "I've seen what you're made of." She didn't answer, but her fingers tightened on the fence rail. Later that day, Ryder helped her fix a warped shutter on the side of the house. The latch had been bent in a storm, and the wood had started to pull loose from the frame. He handed her the hammer, but she hesitated. "I haven't done this before," she said. "Then now's a good time." She climbed the stool, careful with her balance, and tapped the first nail with too much caution. "Swing through, not at," Ryder said. "Let the weight do the work." She tried again, more certain this time. The nail sank in clean. She smiled down at him, a rare thing, not polite but honest. "Better, better." When the work was done, she wiped her hands on her skirt and sat on the porch step, shoulders relaxing for the first time in hours. Ryder sat beside her, their boots side by side in the dust. "You ever think about settling?" she asked. He traced a line in the dirt with his boot heel. "Used to think I didn't deserve it. Then I wasn't sure I'd want it. And now." He didn't answer right away. The breeze picked up, rustling the cottonwoods out near the fence line. He watched the movement, then turned to her. "Now I think about it more than I used to." She picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. "I don't have much to offer. You have a daughter who adores you, a spine made of iron and a heart that hasn't gone hard, even after everything. That's not nothing." Joanna's breath caught, just a little. "I've been waiting so long to feel safe again." "You will." She looked at him then, really looked. "Do you have people, Ryder?" He shook his head. "My brother died in the war. Folks back in Missouri drifted apart after that. I drifted too. You could stop drifting here." He didn't speak, but she saw something shift in him. Not a decision yet, but the space where one might grow. That evening, Ada curled up in her mother's lap on the porch, thumb in her mouth, half asleep from chasing chickens all afternoon. Ryder sat on the rail, oiling his saddle. Joanna watched him, her fingers stroking her daughter's hair. "She called you Mr. Ryder this morning," she said softly. He smiled without looking up. "She's polite. She asked if you'd be here tomorrow." He paused, then wiped the leather clean. "Do you want me here tomorrow?" Joanna looked down at her daughter, then back at him. "Yes." He nodded once. "Then I'll be here." And in the quiet that followed, something settled between them, not spoken, not rushed but steady as the sun dipping behind the ridge. A week passed, and Ryder hadn't left. He rose early, worked through the day, and slept in the hay loft of the barn without ever asking for more than his share of supper. The couple who had taken care of Ada returned to their own homestead a few miles north, and Joanna stood at the stove one morning with a kettle in hand, watching her daughter draw crooked houses in the ash by the hearth, her brow furrowed in deep 6-year-old concentration. Joanna poured 2 cups and carried them out. Ryder was splitting firewood near the shed, his shirt damp with sweat, sleeves rolled to the elbow. She waited until he finished the swing, the thunk of the axe echoing once against the barn wall. "I poured you coffee," she said. He set the axe head down in the stump and followed her to the porch without a word. They sat in the shade, the woodpile resting behind them like a quiet testament to the morning's labor. After a few sips, she asked, "Did you ever want to be a father?" He didn't answer right away. A crow called from the tree line, and he watched it glide above the pasture before he turned back to her. "I used to think it wasn't meant for me. Men who live out of saddlebags don't raise children." Joanna didn't press. She sipped slow and let the silence stretch. "But I watched you with Ada," he said after a moment, "and I thought, maybe a man could learn." Her fingers tightened around the cup. "She's already taken to you. I noticed. She won't say it, but she's been sleeping easier this week." He looked at her then, not like a man being thanked, but like someone who hadn't expected to be seen. "When I was a girl," Joanna said, "my mother had a way of knowing when a storm was coming just by the way the horses shifted. She'd start boiling water and closing shutters before the clouds even showed. I used to think it was magic." He leaned back, one boot resting over the other. "Some people just know how to read the world." She said it wasn't the weather she feared. It was the waiting. Ryder nodded slowly. "Waiting can wear a person down worse than wind ever could." Joanna looked out toward the fields. "I've been waiting a long time to stop being afraid." He set his cup down. "You still are." She hesitated. "I don't know how not to be." "Then let me stay," he said. "Not just for fixing doors or tending stock. Let me be something solid you don't have to carry." Joanna turned to him. "And what if I don't know how to lean?" "You already did," he said. "On that hill." Her breath caught, sharp and quiet. Then she reached out and laid her hand over his. That evening, after supper, Ryder took Ada out to the field where the wildflowers grew thick near the fence line. He knelt beside her and showed her how to gather the ones with long stems, careful not to pull the roots. Joanna watched from the porch, her chin resting on her knees, every part of her still. When they returned, Ada held a clumsy bundle of gold and blue tucked in the crook of her arm. "These are for Mama," she said. Joanna took the flowers with both hands. "They're perfect." Ryder didn't say anything, but he tipped his hat and looked away. She saw the way his jaw shifted, like he was trying to slow something down inside himself. That night, after Ada had gone to bed, Joanna stepped out into the yard where Ryder was stoking the lantern that hung from the porch beam. "You didn't have to do that," she said. He checked the wick. "I know. I want you to stay," she said. "Not just for Ada. For me." He looked at her, and she saw the hesitation fall away. "I will." She stepped closer. "I'm not offering ease. Just a place that's honest." "I'm not looking for ease," he said. "I just want to belong somewhere that doesn't turn cold when the wind shifts." Joanna reached for his hand. "Then you're home." Ryder wrapped his fingers around hers like he'd been waiting for that touch since the first day on the ridge. The lantern light flickered against their joined hands, and above them, the stars blinked into the dark like they'd been listening all along. By late September, the fields behind the house had turned the color of old brass, and the wind carried the dry whisper of oncoming frost. Ryder had repaired the barn roof and added a pen for chickens Joanna had traded for with a neighbor. Ada collected eggs each morning with her brows drawn in solemn concentration, careful not to crack a single shell. There was peace in their days now, not loud or showy, but stitched into the rhythm of work and the quiet company of someone who didn't leave. Ryder stood behind the house that afternoon, sanding a length of pine he'd planed for a cradle. Joanna stepped out with a basin of water, her sleeves damp from washing, and set it on the porch rail. "You planning to make furniture for the whole house?" she asked, drying her hands on her apron. He didn't look up. "Only what's needed." She leaned against the post, watching the careful way his hands moved. "You always work like that with purpose." He glanced her way. "Wasted effort never sat right with me." Joanna folded her arms. "You had a trade before all this?" "I laid fence lines out near Fort Benton once, then freighted for a while. Drove stage, too, when the rivers froze." She stepped down into the yard. "That's a lot of roads." He set the sandpaper aside. "Didn't feel like roads, just stretches between places I didn't belong." Joanna brushed a curl behind her ear. "And now?" He didn't answer, just held her gaze for a long, measured beat. The sun dipped lower, pulling long shadows across the yard. Joanna picked up the wood shavings from the ground beside him, curling them into a bundle. "Ada asked if we were going to have a harvest supper," she said. Ryder wiped his hands. "We could. I've got dried apples, and Mrs. Larrabee brought down a sack of barley last week. If you can spare a rabbit, we'd have enough. I'll find one by morning." She looked at him then, not searching, not questioning, just seeing him. "Ryder," she said, "I've been wondering something." "All right. What made you stop that day on the ridge?" "You had no reason to help me." He let out a breath, slow and even. "I kept riding past folks for a long time. Left a man once who'd broken his leg in a gulch near the Missouri breaks. Told myself he'd manage. I didn't sleep right for weeks. When I saw you swaying on that horse, I knew I wouldn't carry that weight again." She nodded, then reached out and touched the cuff of his sleeve. "You're not the same man anymore." "I know." That night, while Ada slept curled around her patchwork quilt, Joanna stepped out into the cool air. Ryder was at the edge of the field, setting down the lantern after checking the traps. "I wanted to show you something," she said. He followed her to the barn. Inside, a quilt had been spread out over the hay, and a small oil lamp glowed at the far wall. She picked up a jar from the shelf, a gift of blackberry preserves from downriver, and set it between them as they sat. "I haven't had anyone to talk to like this in years," she said, unscrewing the lid. "Not since before the war took Sam." He waited, not pushing. "I was 16 when I married him." He was steady, not loud. Built the front steps with his own hands. "When he died, I stopped waiting for someone to understand the way I'd been split in half." Ryder reached for the jar and dipped a finger in, tasting the preserves. "You're not half anything." She smiled, but it was quiet. "No. Not anymore." They passed the jar back and forth, the sweetness grounding them in something simple and whole. When she leaned into him, it wasn't hesitant. It was certain. Her fingers brushed his jaw, and he kissed her without hurry, like he'd been learning her heart through every silence, every look, every steady task shared between them. And when their foreheads touched, and her breath settled into his shoulder, neither one of them said a word. They didn't have to. Outside, the wind carried the scent of cut hay and smoke, and the stars hung low and bright witness to the soft, steady beginning of something meant to last. The first frost came quiet in the night, silvering the fence rails and the last of the barley stubble. Joanna stepped out before sunrise, shawl tight around her shoulders, and found Ryder already in the garden, pulling the last carrots from the earth with steady hands. "You didn't need to start without me," she said. He brushed his palms against his trousers. "Didn't want the ground to harden before they were out." She knelt beside him and picked through the tops, sorting the good from the split. "Ada's still sleeping. She have the night terrors again?" "No," Joanna said. "She's sleeping through now, all the way till morning." Ryder gave a small nod, but said nothing more. The silence between them had taken on a different shape lately, not the kind that hid what couldn't be said, but the kind that held space for what didn't need to be. They stored the carrots in the root cellar, and when they came up, Joanna lingered at the door with dirt still under her nails. "I've been thinking about winter," she said. He waited, arms crossed. "There's enough firewood, enough grain. I've managed winters before, but this time it's different." "How so?" "It doesn't feel like something I have to survive alone." "You won't." She looked down at her hands. "I've been careful not to speak of things too soon. But I don't want to wait through another season to say what's already true." Ryder stepped closer, his boots brushing frost from the threshold. "Then don't. I want you here, not as a guest, not just for Ada's sake. I want you beside me in all of it, through the cold months and after." He reached out and took her hand, fingers warm around hers. "You don't have to ask twice." The morning passed in quiet chores. Joanna patched a seam in Ada's winter cloak while Ryder mended the latch on the grain bin. At midday, they roasted a bird over the hearth and ate together in the warmth of the kitchen. Ada perched on a stool, swinging her legs and breaking her bread into small, careful bites. After the meal, Joanna pulled a small wooden box from the cupboard and placed it on the table. "This belonged to my mother," she said. "She kept it for her keepsakes. Letters, dried herbs, a lock of my father's hair. I haven't opened it since she passed." Ryder glanced at the box. "You sure you want to now?" "I am." She lifted the lid and sorted through its contents slowly. At the bottom was a length of faded blue ribbon and a folded square of paper. She opened it, her eyes scanning the words. "It's her handwriting," she murmured. "A prayer. For strength. For peace after sorrow." Ryder rested his hand gently on her back. "You've honored it. I think I finally understand what peace looks like." That evening, as dusk settled into the trees, Ryder led Joanna to the pasture's edge. He'd cleared a patch of land near the cottonwoods, ringed now with stones and a circle of lit lanterns. In the center stood a bench he'd built, carved with simple lines and smooth to the hand. Joanna looked around, brow lifted. "What is this?" "A place for us," he said. "To sit when the day's work is done. To talk. Or not." She sat and ran her fingers across the wood. "You made this. For you. For us." Ada came running across the yard with two threadbare dolls tucked under her arms. She climbed onto Joanna's lap without a word and nestled there. Content. Ryder stood before them, hat in his hands. "I've got no preacher's words, but I'll say this plain. I want to marry you, Joanna. If you'll have me, I want to raise Ada like she's my own. I want to grow old here, beside you." Joanna looked up, eyes steady. "Yes." He dropped to one knee in the grass, not out of show, but out of reverence. Ada reached out and touched his cheek with a small, curious hand. "You'll be my papa?" she asked. "If you'll let me," he said. She nodded solemnly, as though she'd known all along. They wed 2 weeks later under a bleached cotton sky, with the neighbor couple and their boys standing witness. Joanna wore her mother's brooch pinned to her collar, and Ryder had cleaned his boots so well they shone. Ada scattered dried wildflowers along the path from the porch to the field, her cheeks pink with pride. After the vows, they shared a meal in the yard: salted pork, baked beans, and a pie Joanna had sweetened with the last of the preserves. No music played, but laughter filled the air, and when the sun dipped low, Ryder pulled Joanna close and swayed with her in the grass, humming a tune too old to name. That night, Ryder carried her across the threshold, not because it was expected, but because he couldn't not. She rested her head on his shoulder, her hair smelling of rosewater and smoke. "This house feels different now," she said. "It's ours," he answered. They lay beside each other beneath a patched quilt, their fingers laced, the fire casting a soft glow across the walls. Outside, the wind stirred the branches, but inside, all was still. Years passed. They added a small room on the north side of the house when Ada turned 10, giving her space of her own. Ryder taught her to ride and to string a line straight, and she took to it with quiet pride. Joanna tended a growing garden, and in time, she began teaching other women in the valley how to sew for trade. The house filled with little things. A tin bell above the door, a shelf of worn books, a second cradle when their son was born 2 winters later. His name was Samuel and his laugh came easy. They never grew rich, but the cupboard stayed full and the roof stayed sound. When the snow came, Ryder stacked wood high along the wall, and Joanna baked bread to warm the rooms. They spent their evenings near the hearth, Ada reading aloud while Samuel snored in his mother's arms. They grew older but not apart. Ryder's hair turned silver at the temples, and Joanna's hands bore the marks of years well worked. But their love held steady, built not on grand gestures, but on every quiet morning shared, every burden shouldered together. And when folks spoke of them in town, they said nothing fancy, only this: they'd been lucky enough to find each other and wise enough to stay. In the end, that was what mattered most.